All right, so we'll give probably another minute. I can see people joining in. All right, we'll give another 30 seconds and then we'll get started, everyone. Cool. So let's get started. Hello, very, very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you have joined today. Really glad, very excited to have all of you here with us. I'm your host for today for this webinar, Abhijit Maitre. I head the corporate marketing at Kore.ai. As we all know, right, in the last couple of years, AI disruption is just unprecedented. It's like never before, and the pace of innovation is just unbelievable. Every morning we wake up and there is some new acronym, new AI term that's emerging that we got to learn, right? We heard about GPTs, LLM models. We talked about RAG, graph RAG, enterprise RAG. We are hearing about agents, and now there is a lot of buzz around agentic AI. In just couple of years, this entire technology, AI technology, particular landscape has rapidly evolved like never before. No other technology, this kind of pace of change happened, right? So there is quite a bit hype around every new shiny object or a new concept that's coming up in the market, and there are more questions than answers. So the latest hype term is, of course, agentic AI, and there is a huge excitement and expectations around this agentic AI. And I come across some of the research. These companies are talking about by 2028, about 33% of enterprise software applications will include agentic AI. That's less than 1% from last year. And there are other reports that are talking about at least 15% of day-to-day work decisions will be made using autonomously through agentic AI. That's up from 0% what we have seen in the last year. So it's a huge transformation that we are about to see in the next few years. So today we are happy to bring you very practical, very simple, no fluff discussion on agentic AI and the practical ways, approaches to look at it, right? So basically we have two experts, and I'll introduce them very shortly. They are going to talk about and also share some of the insights around how companies should look at this whole agentic spectrum and how to approach it, right? Not every use case is bound to be agentic. You don't need to have it, right? So what are those do's and don'ts? What are the frameworks around that one? And then discussion will help you understand true difference between agentic versus agentish, right? TISH, I mean. You will also learn how to apply or where to apply the autonomy, and all of that, right? And lastly, there are practical ways to looking at agentic use cases and how to build, test, and deploy them. So we'll talk about that. We'll show that, right? Exciting. Cool. So joining us today is Leslie Joseph. He's the principal analyst at Forrester, where he actually advises technology executives all around the world on automation, AI, and the future of work. He helps organizations bridge the gap between breakthrough ideas and practical execution, aligning them to the investment in AI and automation with business objective, business outcomes. His research helps enterprises to scale generative AI and intelligent automation across broad spectrum of business functions, and especially focus towards business ROI. So really excited to have Leslie, you here with us. And then we also have joining Murali Raghuram, who is a senior vice president at Kore.ai, where Murali spearheads the entire product strategy and management for AI for process solution. He has ground up build, a few platforms that helps more, from agent and agentic perspective. He brings over 20 years of experience working with various, in various product management and product leadership role at Virtusa, Cognizant, and Emphasis. Um, and then last but not the least is, very excited to have, this webinar is brought to you by Kore.ai, a leader in enterprise AI technology, helping large enterprises globally to reimagine, their business with AI, whether it's a customer service or workplace automation or process automation and things like that, right? To derive value using AI and, AI technology. With offices in major 10 cities globally, Kore.ai technology is trusted by over 480 enterprise companies, very large Fortune 2000 type of companies, and also taken forward to their customers by more than 500 globally certified partners. Before I hand it over to these experts, just a quick announcement. If you have any questions throughout the conversations, please share your questions in the Q&A box there in the window, and I'll do my best to accommodate those questions towards the end of the conversation. With that, just wanted to hand it over to welcome both Murali and Leslie, and over to you guys.
Thanks, Abhijit. Thumbs up if I'm audible.
Yeah, you're
all
audible.
right. Perfect. Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you all and really excited about this topic, which has been a large part of my work life for the last year or so. About a year ago is when I published my first report on agentic AI. Back when I like to joke, there were probably about 2,000 people in the world who knew what agentic AI was, and apparently today everybody's an expert, right? So we can probably end with the webinar right here. No, I'm kidding. Actually, let's talk about this in the context of everything else that's going on in the world. I'm not able to move the slides. Yeah, sorry, there's a bit of a lag. I just wanted to contextualize this, right? This is a quote that came from Jensen Huang some time back, where he said that AI isn't just computing infrastructure at this point, it's also fast becoming the cultural infrastructure for a generation of people, just like probably digital technologies were for the previous generation, or mobile or social were for the previous generation. It's frightening to see and also interesting to see how fast these technologies are moving. As I said, 2.5, 3 years ago, nobody knew what Gen AI was. A year ago, nobody knew what agentic AI was. And all of a sudden, it's all over the place. But when I talk to my clients and when I talk to people out there to discuss agentic AI, what I've realized is that while there is a name recognition of the term, and everybody's had all these different kinds of entities, vendors and peers and so on and so forth, come and talk to them about agentic AI, there isn't a lot of clear baseline understanding of what it actually is. So when you talk to people about agentic AI, there is this almost mythological way in which people try to describe what it is in terms of these are machines that can learn and adapt and do all these crazy things. But in reality, that understanding of what these are and how, for example, they differ from base LLMs is something that it bears discussing and talking about right up front. So what is agentic AI and how does it relate to LLMs? Basically, an agent is a bunch of LLM calls that are wrapped in certain capabilities that extend the native properties of the LLM to new ones that the base LLM didn't typically have. The way that I like to describe it in a metaphor is that it's like, 2.5, 3 years ago, we invented the LLM that was kind of like inventing the brick. And so for a long time, we invented the brick, and then we were just gloating and feeling happy about ourselves, about the fact that we could build these lovely geometric shapes and we could maybe paint them with patterns. What we hadn't figured out, though, was that if we put these bricks together in specific configurations with specific external entities like, brick and mortar and whatnot, we could start constructing our skyscrapers and towns and hospitals and so on. And that's really what agentic AI is that it is that application development layer on top of the base LLM that uses these LLMs as the underlying cognitive infrastructure, but then allows you to build complex structures, complex applications on top of the LLM using these capabilities. And what these capabilities are is they are called design patterns, and there are about 4 or to 6, depending on who you talk to, but I count about 5, which are on the slide. So there are 5 distinct design patterns, or which are the attributes that you give to the LLM, to the base LLMs, so that you enable them to be agentic in nature. And these are operationalized either through prompt frameworks, prompting strategies on one end, or they are distinct technology components. But the idea is that these are to be used together in combination, and that's what really moves you from the LLM that can only generate content, as the name suggests, to the agent that can actually do a bunch of things in the real world that bring it into the realm of high-end automation. And the 5 that I've chosen to showcase, that I typically choose to showcase, are what you see on the slide. There's planning, which is basically a prompt framework wherein you can take an LLM and give it a goal. And so now that it's agentic, the agent can break that goal down into the specific structured steps that it needs to take to be able to achieve that goal. Reflection is the second, and that's really the ability of the LLM to think about its output and revise its own output. So the agent can revise its own output over time. So let's say it's a plan, it can think about that plan and articulate it better and break it down into steps, or reflect on whether parts of the plan are feasible or not, and upgrade or change them. The third is memory, and this is a core technical framework typically which you have to implement, which is this idea that an LLM does not have native memory of its own outside of the size of its context window. But enterprise apps, you actually need memory. You need to remember things like a customer ID, or the fact that you're on step 17 for a 30-step process. And that stuff has to be built in. And so you have to implement memory. The fourth and the fifth are the most interesting and the most relevant in the context of agentic AI. The fourth is tool use, which is the fact that now these agents can use external tools. And obviously, these are digital or software tools. So they may be an external function or an API, or it could be a workflow that they can trigger, or maybe they write or read from a database. These are capabilities that the LLM doesn't have, but now the agent can have, and that brings it into the realm of being able to do things or affect things in the real world rather than just generate language. And the fifth is multi-agent collaboration. This is one of the most interesting bits, is that different agents that are defined differently by their system prompt can actually coordinate with each other, work with each other to solve a more complex problem in collaboration with each other. This is interesting, especially because of the fact that agents are software, right? But for the first time, you have software talking to other software, not in code or not in structured APIs, but in just regular plain language, English, like you and I talk. And that's really interesting in more ways than one, which we will talk about downstream in the rest of this presentation. But it's important to baseline here and understand what agentic AI really is before we move forward. And look, folks, there are, dime a dozen examples that you might get from various sources if you just even Google at this point use cases for agentic AI. The fact is that agentic AI does unlock a whole bunch of new possibilities, and it can be sometimes difficult to wrap your head around all the different ways in which you can apply it. But the way that we think about it at Forrester is the fact that we think that there are 4 modes of impact that agentic AI can typically have on the operating model. The first is augmentation, where the agent helps humans, working side by side with humans, helps humans work faster or work better without really changing the structure of the job itself. The second is straightforward, it's automation. So agents take over and completely automate existing work, so the human goes out of isn't doing the job. The third mode is reinvention. And this is interesting because this is where the agent comes in and starts to reshape how, for example, work gets coordinated across different departments or different systems, or maybe it crunches the time that it takes to assemble capability together or assemble insight together, and thus makes the whole process not just faster, but different in the way that it's almost like you get a whole new muscle to do the same work, but in a different way. And then the fourth is reinvention, which is essentially about transforming the operating model itself. So maybe because you have an agent now, you can run the operations differently, or maybe you have new products and services that you can take, or a new way to take your products or services to the market, and so on. And these four modes are really an interesting way to think about agentic AI and how it applies to the specific use cases, because each of these modes comes with a very different configuration of requirements and dimensions that you have to keep in mind when you apply them. Uh, and so how are companies using this? This is a case study that I wrote a few months ago about a bank right here in Singapore called OCBC Bank. Uh, and this is not unique in the sense that at this point, almost every organization is inspecting everything that it's doing, to every single operational process, every single business process, to try and understand where agents can be used. But this was one of the pioneers, and they kind of came in and looked at all of the work that the bank was doing and tried to apply agentic AI, and they were building at the time, to see, not building as in not buying, but building on their own, to try and understand how they could go through business process after business process across the bank and create that transformation across everything. And so they had about 15 to 18 different use cases for agents in production at some point. But some of the more interesting ones, just to give you some inspiration, is they used to have something called a relationship manager co-pilot, wherein if a relationship manager was going to talk to a client, they could engage with or chat with the pilot, would do all the back end work and bring together all the talking points that were required for the customer. Another interesting one is something called sources of funds matching, which any wealth management company has to do. And it's very simple, is that it's an advanced non-linear KYC process, wherein if anybody's coming, a high net worth individual comes to invest in the bank has to go through this process, which is a very non-linear process. And typically you've had to have business analysts do kind of multifaceted research into the individual or into the company before coming back with a recommendation of whether to agree or not to agree to accept them as a client. And now, once they implemented this agentic system, about 70 to 75% of the transaction volume of these investigative KYC processes was going through the agents. So it's a very interesting world right now, and a lot of cognitive processes, as you can see, are moving to agents or have the potential to move to agents. But at the same time, it does require a certain level of baseline understanding and willingness across the bank or across an organization to say, how can we apply the four modes to the different use cases that we have to steadily and relentlessly, in a sense, transform the way we work using AI. Obviously, all of this boils down to the core idea that anybody's mission today, should they choose to accept it, is autonomy. What you're trying to do is you're driving autonomy through every single business and customer process to whatever extent that you possibly can. Now, remember, I said autonomy and not automation, because automation has certain connotations in terms of being more tactical and being more of the work that we used to do 3 or 4 years ago in terms of deterministic digital process automation, or RPA. Whereas autonomy signifies something completely different. It's the ability to engage with a business process completely autonomously to whatever extent you have available to you across deterministic, non-deterministic, and now obviously agentic brings a whole new dimension. In fact, when we talk about autonomy, the first thing that springs to your mind is this idea of self-driving cars. And so, inspired by the 5 levels of autonomy that we talk about in the context of self-driving cars, what we've done is we've created a 5 level progression of the autonomy spectrum for enterprises right here. And you can see this going from level 0, which is completely manual, all the way to level 5, which is probably completely autonomous, which would qualify to some extent as artificial general intelligence. I'm not saying that's here, and I don't think it's going to be here anytime soon. So that's a little fictional at this point. But what AI, the way that it exists today, brings to the spectrum is, you always had level 0, level 1s, level 2s, but now you have level 3 and level 4, which are both linked to this new agentic concept, but they're not 100% agentic in themselves, right? In the sense that level 3 is something that I call agentish. And level 4 is completely agentic. Now, what's agentish is what you'll ask. Well, agentish is this, right? Is that for most real world processes, you don't want the agent to have 100% agency on however it wants to dispose of the control flow of the program or the workflow or whatnot. Sometimes, and for most enterprise processes, you still need guardrails. You still need kind of a flow chart, right? You still need a certain level of determinism, but within that, you want to be able to embed LLM capabilities or agentic capabilities for specific tasks, specifically bounded tasks, in a way that the agent does its job, its cognitive context and whatnot, and then is able to hand over the task or the rest of the process to the next part of the flowchart, which in itself may be deterministic. And what we realize is that over time is that while agentic is aspirational and really very helpful in areas like research and coding and so on, there's a lot of enterprise processes that actually sit in the agentish domain and that need that level of guardrails, that need that level of deterministic oversight and governability that is critical to the way that these processes are orchestrated. Um, and so today, the sweet spot really is going to be for the foreseeable future more agentish than agentic. However, as we go forward, obviously AI research and AI development is not stopping, and so we'll see where it ends up. Um, but framing your business in this format, in this fashion, is very interesting and important because what it does is that it allows you to think about every single function, every single task that you do in your business in context of this progression from deterministic to agentish to agentic, and to try and imagine almost a roadmap of how you would, for each of these tasks and functions, progress down this pathway. And maybe there are blockers, or maybe there's an extent beyond which it doesn't make sense for a particular function to continue to go down this agentic path. So maybe you reach agentish, but creating this sort of a heat map of how far your business processes can go along that pathway to autonomy is really critical. It's also critical and interesting to think about it in the context of, as you start to deploy all of these things, what new capabilities does the process need to have and does the organization need to have to be able to execute effectively on each of these levels? And so it's an interesting exercise that I suggest that anybody who's interested in trying to drive agentic thinking throughout their organization do, is to really think about these three pillars, these three roadmap progression pathways, and say, what does this process look like when it is deterministic versus agentish versus agentic? Um, and then the other question that comes up is, how do we bring agents into the workplace? True, agents are entering the workplace right now through multiple doors. And the fact is that when you think about how do I implement agents, you're increasingly going to have multiple different kinds of vendors coming at you. You're going to have multiple different ways in which to implement these across build, compose, and buy. And so it's important to think about the vendor stratification in some sense, and to understand what comprises this market, right? And so just as a handy reckoner, I've tried to put together a couple of slides that show you the build options and the buy options. And so you can buy, which is essentially you buying pre-built agents or digital workers from someone out there who's already taken the trouble to assemble these together. So you can have pre-built agents, or your BPO might be able to sell you digital workers on a what is called a service as a software mode, or you may have industry-specific AI products that you can buy agents from. On the other hand, you can build, and that's where it gets more interesting, is that you can go, and here we have really 4.5 different kinds of options, right? So the first option is you can completely build from scratch, which is you use like a platform like LangChain or Kore.ai, what we call agent frameworks. Or you can go leverage a low code, no code kind of an agent builder like Google Vertex. Or you can have hyperscaler platforms like AWS Bedrock or Azure, and these are these are vendors that already have a broad suite of AI services on their cloud provider platforms, and you can build and integrate into them. And the fourth is agentic process automation vendors, which are essentially the traditional deterministic automation vendors, the BPM or the RPA vendors or platforms of the past that are now increasingly moving towards becoming more and more agentic in terms of their offering. And then I said 4.5, and the half is really the last one, which is increasingly we are seeing a lot of the data and ML ops platforms that have been focused on things like data processing and model deployment and ML ops and so on, which are now forming that substrate. So they may not always allow you to build agents natively on their own platforms, but they can support the development of these AI capabilities and the grounding back into the data, into your data estate. And so kind of there's obviously we have a matrix that, and this is fresh research that I just dropped a couple of days ago, but there is a whole matrix of thought around when do you build, when do you compose, and when do you buy. Uh, the idea which is really critical here to take back home is the fact that you will probably never or no organization will be pure build or pure buy. Everybody will be some version of this, and it will be really important as you go forward to be able to understand how to manage a multi-vendor, multi-agent portfolio of these applications so that you're able to make these decisions better, but also to manage this portfolio in a way that is effective, that takes care of your security posture and so on. So this is fresh research. You'll get the slides or the replay, so I'm not going to go through everything, but these are the two different slides that cover the various parameters on the vertical axis that we suggest you think about when you're making these decisions. And so obviously when you embrace autonomy, there's a lot that needs to change in terms of not just the mechanics of, okay, so this is a little more autonomous, but really just a lot has to change in terms of the way that you think about strategic focus, or the way you think about performance management, or how your human roles and machine roles fit into the workplace dynamics. So there's a lot to be talked about here, and we have a long way to go in terms of even figuring out all the answers, because we're still, as I keep saying, we're still on step one of a 1,000-step journey. But the fact is that, and I said this earlier in this presentation, is that we have software talking to other software in English, or choose your language, right? And that opens up a few new issues that have never existed in the history of software engineering, which is the fact that all the ambiguity and all the variability that we as humans know how to handle in our day-to-day interactions with each other is now translating into the software world. And so that itself is creating a lot of different ways in which agents and multi-agent systems can fail. I have done research in which I've identified about 29 different ways in which these can fail across these 5 different categories. And so it's really important to understand that while agentic seems like just the cool new thing, it also opens up a whole new approach in terms of how you think about governing these capabilities, thinking through how these capabilities relate to your traditional software and your workforce management and all those principles, which become really fundamental to how you can drive success. So what should you do next? Now that you are armed with all this information, and if you're already thinking about agentic or AI agents to some extent, my suggestion typically is to start small, to think big, but also to move fast, because the value is not so much in the first thing that you create, whether that's an application or a capability, but the value is really in the learning that you are able to get when you go through this process and are able to build something of your own and eventually manage a multi-agent portfolio across a bunch of your processes and capabilities and your value streams and so on. And so identify a goal-oriented process that is mid to high in terms of complexity, and then experiment and keep experimenting till you get a sense of what's going on. And then obviously as you build, also keep in mind everything that I said about governance and transparency and the need to have human in the loop, and then try to fit back your workforce strategy to increase your firm's ability to deal with this variations and variability. And so that's all I had. I want to hand it over to Murali for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Leslie. That was pretty insightful. Hi, everybody. My name is Murali Raghuram. I'm part of Core, as Abhijit introduced. So I'm going to just spend a bit of time in terms of thinking about the entire aspect of conversation that Leslie just talked about, and how do you actually bring into platform capabilities. And one of the things we've been, as we've been working with various different customers for the last couple of years, to be honest, is we've been seeing the organization structure slowly evolving. There is going to be a synergy between human and AI employees coming together, and the organization structure is going to start seeing a combination of these two at various different kind of roles, and eventually having this as a united organization that will bring in the capabilities of AI at various different places, initially as an assistant and a co-pilot to the humans, and then eventually starting to take some autonomous decisions over a period of time. Obviously, there's a spectrum, as Leslie was talking about. You would start with something very small, and eventually you start providing the AI's capabilities to actually make a lot more autonomous decisions over a period of time. Now, for example, simple if-else loops now are becoming decision-making capacity that's been handed over to the agents and the models. Eventually, you may have full processes having complete autonomous capability, saying whether you have to take a path A or a path B, and that decision is based on various different data points that you have within your enterprises, and the models can look into that, the agents can look into that, and then decide what needs to happen. Now, for you to build an organization like this, there are a lot of things that needs to change. And one of the fundamental ways that you can think about how the enterprise architecture looks like, if you look at currently what's happening with these, you typically have three different broad areas. On one side, you have user journeys, where you have customer user journey, employees user journey coming in, and have use cases which have combination of human employees and automations that have been built for the last couple of decades, working together to support the user journeys. And then you have data sources, and typically over a period of time, you have built API gateways, and some applications do have API gateways, some do not, but those API gateways interact with these use cases to serve the customers. What we've been seeing in the last year or two is there is a new layer that's getting introduced in between. On one side, there is an experience layer, which is essentially the interaction between these use cases and the user journeys. But the most important part is there is a new layer for GenAI applications and agents, Agentic AI. And this is where you would see the combination of all the modern technologies of AI coming into play, and orchestrations on top of that to enable how to actually take the power of all of these LLMs and the new AI models, along with the capabilities of the building blocks that Steve was talking about, and construct that into powerful workflows, deterministic, partially, semi-autonomous, and completely autonomous capabilities. Now, if you want to build these agents, from a very onset at the top level, it looks very similar to what you would have done with traditional web application development. You have an idea, you go through the process of experimentation, then you build them, eventually you have to serve them for thousands of users, and hopefully you'll have a better and enhanced experience for your employees and your customers. But when you go underneath it and double click this, there's a lot of different things that come into play. Now, earlier you used to write specs in terms of how the application has to be built. Now you think about prompts. You have to think about how to engineer those prompts, how to make sure those prompts are actually working across various different type of models, whether you're choosing open source models or commercial models or a combination of them, and then start thinking about how do you actually start integrating them with the external systems, so on and so forth. Then when you start thinking about build, again, various different type of capabilities come into play. You're thinking about tools, you're thinking about guardrails, you're thinking about model fine-tuning, you're thinking about background jobs and queue management. All of these pieces come into play because now we are trying to provide these capabilities to the agents for them to execute. And you have to really think about how do you orchestrate all of these pieces together to ensure that agents are working as they're supposed to. Then when you have to think about serving this from a simple experimentation, go to production ready, serving thousands of users, you're thinking about high availability, compliance. Most importantly, you're also thinking about observability. What's happening with these models? Are they black box? Can we understand why it is doing what it is doing? How do we ensure that we actually nudge the models and the agents to produce what we're looking for? And most importantly, how do we ensure that they do not deviate away from what the objective we've set forward to them, and they don't hallucinate, they don't look into information that we don't want them to, and then provide the repeatable results as much as possible. Of course, AI models are probabilistic by nature. They are not deterministic. That's the power of them, but we have to still ensure that we provide the security governance and structure around that to make sure they don't do what they're not supposed to do. And we've seen examples where things have gone out of the rail and things have become pretty complex for some of the organizations who started experimenting this in production very, very early. So the point we're trying to make is that, if you really think about how do you take your existing processes and enable them to be agentic and AI ready, where do you want to really focus on? The real heavy lifting happens on the left-hand side of this entire process. You want to look at what's happening with the entire process that you have within your organization, identify parts that can be automated, quickly experiment with them, and then see which ones can be actually made completely autonomous, semi-autonomous, or you have to have a combination of deterministic and autonomous capabilities. And then everything that is repeatable, which is the same whether you're doing a single agent or 1,000 agent, you definitely want to have that automated. You want to make sure that you actually bring in those capabilities, put that into your infrastructure, put that into your entire capability of your technology part of the organization. You want to focus on what is important for you from a business perspective and ensure that the platform itself enables you to scale from a single experimentation to thousands of users using that particular capability. Now, what we've been working on broadly is to ensure that this particular platform that enables you to go from experimentation to production very, very quickly. And what are the different building blocks that are necessary for us to make that happen? Leslie kind of touched upon the design patterns that was there, and we've kind of brought those design patterns into the platform itself. So if you really think about what is necessary, first, you think about the model itself. Now, obviously, when you think about agentic systems, the heart and brain of that particular agentic system is the LLMs. That's the one that's making decisions. That's the one that's thinking. You have to ensure that you tame that to make what is necessary of it for your specific use cases and scenarios. But you need to be able to use a choice of models that is commercial, open source, and probably fine-tune small language models for specific use cases. Then you have to experiment with prompts. As I said, prompts are the new specs. Right? You're not really writing specs anymore. You're thinking about making the agents think of how to break down the structure, but you're providing them various different type of capabilities in terms of prompts. Now, for you to experiment with prompts, generate comprehensive prompts, and make sure that you're actually looking at that prompt across various different models and how they perform with each of the models, and then using that data to say, well, this prompt makes sense versus not. Eventually, prompt itself becomes a full life cycle. You want to ensure that when you change a particular prompt, you're not directly embedding that into different agentic applications. You can change that in a centralized place, and the applications kind of update themselves with the latest prompts and the latest models without having any impact on what's happening in the production today. Knowledge is very, very critical. Obviously, you have to give access to not only the repositories that you have within your organization, but also to your data sources via various different techniques, including the APIs and the latest AMCPs and the protocols that's available. Memory is very, very critical. How do you ensure that while the models, when you interact with that is transient, you give an information to the model, it responds back, but you have to construct a memory around that to make sure your the agents that you're working with in your organization remember what's happening, understand the users that they're interacting with, whether it's your customer, employees, and then does not go back to level 0 when it's interacting with the same individual again, and somehow you start constructing on top of it. Eventually, you have to have tools which enables you to construct the ability for the models and the agents to interact with external systems and your entire ecosystem that you have within your organization. But the most important part is what we call Evaluation Studio. I'll touch upon that in the demo very quickly. But what we have been seeing is that traditionally, when you think about application development, whether it's web application or desktop-based application, we used to follow the technique called test-driven development. Now, that was important because you had to ensure that there is a lot of test coverage of everything you build. But when it comes to GenAI applications and agentic, we believe it's going to be evaluation-driven development. A very, very similar concept, but the approach with which you actually evaluate the model is a little different. The evaluate agents is a little different as compared to web application or desktop application or mobile application for that matter. So Evaluation Studio becomes very, very critical, and you have to go through the entire process of making sure that everything you build, right from the early days of finding the right prompt to the production, that you're evaluating the agents and they're working as they're supposed to over a period of time. And then obviously the entire aspect of orchestration, the entire agent orchestration, multi-agent orchestration, et cetera, that's necessary, interacting with various different enterprises. The other important piece is that you would have different capabilities available and different type of frameworks available in the market. Now, over a period of time, we've realized that every time you actually go into the enterprise, there'll be systems and processes at play. And whenever you bring in a new platform, it has to clearly coexist with that without disrupting. So it has to work with already what you have in terms of process and systems. It has to work with multiple different agents. If you've already built some, multiple different models, multiple different cloud infrastructure. So our focus has been, when we're starting to build this particular platform, is to be completely model agnostic, completely infrastructure and cloud agnostic, and completely agnostic of where you build what, so that we can actually interact with everything you have and coexist within your existing enterprise ecosystem without disrupting a thing that's there. So with that, I just want to jump onto and show you the capabilities of the platform itself. There's a couple of demos. Let me quickly switch there. So what you see here is our agentic platform. Now, there are various different pieces here. I'm not going to be able to go into each one of them because it's pretty comprehensive and we would not have time for that. But I want to touch upon key important points. First is we have, as I was talking about, the capability of Model Studio, where we enable you to kind of bring in any commercial model with a single click. You can use that directly via the provider, or you can use that from any of the cloud providers such as AWS or Azure or GCP. Or if you have these models working on your existing system somewhere, you can integrate that with APIs directly. We also support open source models for you to deploy. We support about 50 plus open source models directly out of the box, but we also support the ability for you to actually bring in open source models directly from Hugging Face. You can connect to Hugging Face, bring in any open source model that's out there in Hugging Face, and then host that within the platform for you to use that across. However, if you have done fine-tuning of a model, and if you want to just import that, we provide the importing of the model too, and that model can be hosted directly. We provide a simple way for you to do the fine-tuning of the models. You can use any of the base models that we support, or any of the Hugging Face models that are available there. Use it as a base model, provide some training data set, and build on top of it. So that's Model Studios. Then we have Prompt Studio. This gives you a full life cycle of prompts. Essentially, it gives you the ability for you to actually build various different prompts. And then once you go into the prompts, you can then compare that against various different models. We enable you to write prompts directly. We also enable you to generate test data set using models for you to test that. And then you will be able to test them across various different ones. Once you have these, we have the ability for you to version control this. This gives you the ability for you to look into each of these prompts and then version control this over a period of time. And every prompt you create within the Prompt Studio has an API endpoint. So this becomes a central lifecycle for you to manage prompts. Any consumer of this particular prompt can use this API endpoint, send a particular version number if they want to, and they're guaranteed to get exactly the same prompt, irrespective of how many times they call. And if they don't send a version number, they'll get the latest prompt. Hence, we've learned over a period of time working with various different customers that they wanted a centralized way of managing prompts, and we've kind of built around that. The most important piece I want to talk about is agentic capability. Now, this is where the multi-agent orchestration capability comes in. So this agentic AI, essentially, this is what we call an agent app. Here, what you're seeing is a banking assistant, which has various different capabilities and multiple different agents available here. Each one of these are different agents, and each one of them have various different tools available. So banking assistant has the capability of transaction manager, payments manager, cards manager, loans manager, each one of them being an agent. The bank assistant is the key orchestrator that's bringing all of these pieces together. And then every one of them have access to 16 different tools, whether it's about adding pays, getting knowledge, applying credit card information, et cetera, et cetera. Now you can build various different type of tools within the platform. You also can provide knowledge. Now here you can provide things like banking policies and loan knowledge, which is basically your SOPs or rules that are available. We have the entire ability for us to go and retrieve that piece of information, archive that in semantic DB, and then query on that to get the right kind of information using complex RAG. And this knowledge that you've stored is used by agents when necessary. You can provide various different type of tools. You can provide workflow tools. You can provide code tools or MCP tools directly, which will enable for you to interact with MCP servers behind the scenes. Now, the agents will use these tools as appropriate. And we have various different capabilities. For example, workflow tool is a pretty complex workflow capability. When you go in, you can build in this entire workflow from the ground up as a comprehensive deterministic flow, step by step. Each one of the workflow has a start node and end node that defines the API contract for you. And then you have different type of nodes that you can stitch together with workflows. For example, you have AI nodes that can do text to text, text to image, audio to text, and image to text. Or you have custom function nodes where you can write custom Python functions, custom JavaScript functions. You have API nodes that can bring in information from various different APIs. So what this enables you to do is bring in the combination of deterministic steps and semi-autonomous capabilities by dropping in AI nodes, which can act as decision makers in various different stages of the flow, but still you have the control of how the entire flow has to be orchestrated. Now, when you bring in all of these into the agent itself, now that agent can actually, given a particular query, this particular orchestrator can figure out which agent to invoke and then get the entire aspect of the responses that the user is looking for. We also have the ability for you to provide memory. We have various different type of memory states. One is a simple memory where it is a key value pair. Then we are working on the semantic capability where you have a semantic memory. You can have an episodic memory on top of that, which gives you the capabilities of saying, how do I want to construct a memory store and preserve all the information that's happening as a conversation between various different users. And then that will be used for you to retrieve information about that particular individual user or a particular session for later use, and then continue the conversation from there if necessary. So I'll actually do a couple of quick queries to show you how the simulation works. So we have a direct simulation here. This is a contract, procurement contract based agent that's been built. So you can see if I start asking questions, how things gets executed here. So I'm basically asking this particular agent to say, well, what are the contracts with the contract amount greater than 500,000? Now, what this is doing is basically the supervisor is trying to look into what kind of agent that needs to be invoked. First of all, it realizes that this is a query that needs to be done on a DB. So it's looking into the insights agent and it's figuring out, well, I need to actually invoke two different type of tools, Prisma query tool and a query processing tool. And once it goes in a query processing tool, what it is actually doing is based on the query that the user has provided, it is generating a SQL query for it to go and look up the DB. And once the DB has been looked up, the response is given back to the supervisor, and supervisor uses this piece of information and summarizes what's happening. Now, you can actually create much more complex queries as well on top of this. So I'm actually creating a complex query that includes two different things. Not only it's going to look at the contract value more than 250,000 now, but it is also going and looking at these contracts in detail and getting the full contract information from there. So what this will do is it will actually invoke the supervisor twice. First, it will actually get the information about the different type of contracts that has contract value greater than 250. And you can see the entire thinking process that's happening here. It's basically started saying, I'm going to break this down into two different queries. First is actually looking at the contract value. You will see that it actually got the information from the SQL query, basically using the insights agent. Then the supervisor realized that for the second one, it needs to go to the knowledge agent, which it's looking at the knowledge DB information available for the contract itself, and then extracting the data from that document and querying the information about that. And then finally, it'll respond back with what's happening. So here you're actually looking at the generation of the knowledge contract data itself from the query, which is basically a knowledge DB using some kind of a RAG ingestion and extraction. Now, finally, you will see that this actually went through various different levels of thinking, and it came up with a complete response of saying, well, what's happening, which is the contract that was used for responding back. And then finally, it's giving me the full details about exactly what's happening with you for the query that actually responded. So you have full traceability here. You can go into any one of the sessions and look at exactly what happened with each of the sessions. You can go to the traces itself, and you will be able to look into each trace step by step. And we will have full control of observability here. You will be able to look into every step that's happening, every model invocation, what the model got as information, what it responded back. You also have every trace in terms of what the external tool calling was, if it actually used an MCP server, if it used a code tool, if it used a workflow tool, and you will be able to look into each one of them and see exactly what's happening at every step of the way, so that you have full control of exactly what's happening and you'll be able to debug if something goes wrong. I do want to touch upon Evaluation Studio because that's the most important piece, because for you to build agents is one part of the story, but for you to be able to build agents that are reliable and make sure that it is you have the confidence of pushing them into production requires you to evaluate the agents from the early days of writing prompts to fully fledged production ready information.
So when a time check, I mean, we have 9 more minutes left, so we'll leave at least 4 or 5 minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, I'll finish in the next couple of minutes and then we can go into questions. There are two different types of evaluations we look into. One we call semantic evaluation, which is essentially evaluating how the model responds. And the other we call behavioral evaluation. That's about agentic and how the entire agent behavior works. So I'll touch upon these two very quickly, and then we can go into Q&A. So when we think about model evaluation, we provide various different ways for you to do the model evaluation. First of all, you construct an evaluation project, because we think that evaluation is a full life cycle, right from the early days to post-production, and you'll be able to do various different types of evaluation over a period of time. And then you can construct this, when you go into the evaluation itself, you can think about this as a complex spreadsheet, which gives you ability for you to add various different columns. First, as you import the data set that you want to evaluate, you can import the data set that you have written, essentially historical data set. You can generate data set using semantic data, or you can import data set directly from production. That all the three abilities you have for you to do the evaluation starting point. Then you have the ability to add evaluators. You can actually have various different type of columns. You can have a runner prompt column, which, for example, let's say you created a fine-tuned model. You want to use the fine-tuned model to test against these queries. Then runner prompt can be a particular column that uses a model for you to run that. Search AI gives you the RAG implementation. Essentially here, the shortlisted chunks is coming from Search AI for you to actually apply that. This is because sometimes when you're sending the information to the model, you're not only sending the original query, you're also sending the additional context. So you want to test that again. And there are various different evaluators as well. We provide quality evaluators, we provide safety evaluators, and Braga's evaluators, which is essentially RAG. Each one of these provides the ability for you to say which input, which output you want to use for you to do the evaluation. On top of that, we give you the ability to write your own custom evaluators. So you can define what the evaluator name is, whether it is quality or safety, define, choose the model. And we also give you a starting point. So for example, if you want to tweak the groundedness evaluator, you can use that as a starting point, update that to choose whatever information you want to, provide your own prompts, and then define what scoring is for success. If it's scoring in terms of the number, if it's greater than a certain threshold, then we consider it success. If it's less than a certain threshold, so you can define that. If it's Boolean, obviously it's pass and fail. So that is the evaluation from model perspective. Agent evaluation is a little tricky because now not only are we evaluating the model input and output, we're also looking at various different pieces. We're looking at things like, did the agent pick up the right tool? If the agent picked up the right tool, did it actually pick up the right parameters to provide the value to that tool? And if it did pick up the right values, did it actually also provide the right values to those parameters? So we think about tool calling accuracy, we think about agent calling accuracy. So each one of these are different ways for us to look into the evaluation. So we evaluate agents, we evaluate the entire orchestrator model itself, and evaluate the whole thing as a black box saying, given an input, did it actually give a right output? So it's a pretty comprehensive evaluation studio that we actually built in, and we continue to evolve that because we believe this is going to be very, very critical for you to be able to put agents into production. So there is a lot of other information that we can go to at some other point of time, but I know in the interest of time, I'll take a pause here. But thank you so much for listening to all the discussions we had about the platform. Looking forward to the Q&A. Over to you, Abhijit.
Excellent, excellent. Very nice. And I can see that, there is so much to share. This is very interesting topic, right from what Leslie shared and what you have demonstrated. Really very exciting things there. Let's pick up a couple of questions that we have here from attendees, and then we'll see how things go. So I think the first question here is, can you speak to how Kore.ai platform helps manage and control running cost? Maybe briefly, if you could touch upon that.
Right. So in our platform, we have this ability for you to monitor what's happening. And this monitoring gives you the full analytics. of all the tools and the models. And so you'll be able to take a look at exactly what's happening, irrespective of what model you've chosen. So for example, here we're talking about Claude. You can choose the model to actually have in, and this keeps you control of exactly what's happening and all the spend you've done. Not only that, when you're actually doing the evaluations at various different levels, you'll be able to figure out what the prompts is going to cost, and you'll be able to understand at the very beginning, before you actually put this into production, where the token costs are going, if at all, and then start figuring out if that's the right kind of prompts that you want to provide, so on and so forth. The third way is that because of the capability we provide as a model fine-tuning, you can, over a period of time, and we've seen that our customers do this right now, is that you can use a powerful model like Claude 3.74 or GPT 4.03 Mini and run this in production for 3-4 months, understand how they're actually providing the output, use that as a data set, because we have access to the model traces. Every model you've executed over a period of time, you can actually go in and look at exactly what has happened at each one of them, what input, output has come in. And you can use this as data and then fine tune a small language model that does the job that the large language model was doing. This will help you then control what kind of cost can come in, because once you have a SLM running, you can have a very small infrastructure for you to run the SLM on, and that will remove the token cost that you have to pay to the external provider. So there are a few ways for you to manage that. But as I was saying earlier, this is a continuous iterative process as you would doing the typical web application development, for you to go through and see what prompts work, what models work, and how do you actually make sure that everything is working in concerted orchestration for you to look at what you want to, both in experimentation and production.
Cool. I think that third option is pretty interesting one. Moving on to the next question. In the demo, what's the benefit of having different knowledge agent and insight agent? Can one agent handle this query and reduce the thinking time?
The way we think about agentic is it's very similar to probably having a team of interns. You have specialization, and we do want to create agents so that they have specific specialization, giving them a set of tools, giving them a set of personas, so they don't go through the process of hallucinating. So if you contain what the agents can do, giving them a specific instructions and making them think through only that particular persona, they execute pretty well as compared to loading them with a lot more tools and then creating an ambiguity in terms of how they have to execute. So we let the orchestrator decide which intern to call. Really, these agents are kind of interns that the orchestrator have access to. And then it triggers that particular intern, and knows that capability. And then orchestrator also knows exactly which particular agent to call, so that it knows exactly this is the kind of capability this agent has, and it executes this. And I mean, this is an architectural choice you can do. You can, of course, build everything in one agent, but we've realized over a period of time, giving a specific persona and small level skill set for a particular agent works much better than actually pushing one agent to do everything. And I don't think the thinking time actually reduces. In fact, what happens is if you bring in everything one particular agent, it may think longer for it to go back and forth, for it to figure out which persona it has to actually use, as compared to distributing that across various different agents.
Cool. Another question on LLM in package application, sort of agent is like wrapping up the LLM in package application, sort of agent is how Core can help.
Packaged application. I'm not sure I understand the question properly. I'm assuming that once you build this entire thing, how would you expose that externally? If that is the question, every agent you've actually built in has an API endpoint by definition. So these API, you can publish this to various different environments. You can create logical environments like production, UAT, dev, etc. You have API keys for you to work with, and then you can consume that in whichever form and fashion you would want to, including your own chatbots or your application, so on and so forth. I'm assuming that's what the question meant. If it is not, then please provide a clarification. I'll try to respond back better.
Yeah, maybe, in the interest of time, maybe it'll be easier to, send these questions over to us, and definitely we'll have Leslie and Murali answer those questions, more in detail. I have one question for Leslie, if you can quickly talk about that, Leslie. You gave a long list of evaluation criteria for organizations to choose the agent delivery model. Considering enterprises are going to be at different stages in their maturity, how would you guide or advise them in terms of, prioritizing 2 or 3 things from that long list?
So I think that's a great question. I think it deserves a much longer response, to be honest. But I think if you were to try and boil it down to simple things, it is first of all you try and understand how clean and direct the use case is. Which is kind of core to everything, right? Is there ROI? And when you talk about ROI, you're not just talking about the immediate ROI of the whatever manpower replacement or the immediate process that you have in mind, but you have to think about it in context of the broader secondary and tertiary effects of the automation that you're bringing in or whatever it is. So first, is there a business case? How does that business case map to the different options that are available to you? And then I think it's also important to think about whether there is some sort of a secret sauce element to it, in the sense that if it's just a generic capability, then you can just go buy it from a vendor, right? There are enough and more vendors. If you have a HRIS, HRMS solution, or an employee experience platform that is offering maybe a bunch of payroll agents on tap, you're not going to probably be a differentiated organization in the market because of how well you do payroll, but that might be a way to think about saving some costs in a bunch of processes that are already baseline. Whereas if there's something that your organization does really well that's based on your organization's data, the saying, what makes your beer better, if it's something that makes your beer better, then you want to probably go and either build, or if building is something outside of scope for you right now in terms of the talent that you have and the understanding that you have of agentic, then probably just go compose. So that's kind of rule of thumb, but it gets a lot more complex than that.
Cool. No, totally understand. I know that we are over time. I'll take these couple of questions. Those who have, of course, hard stop, feel free to drop off. But I think these are questions worth taking. Quick question. I think if you want to try out this platform as a developer, how we can do that thing. I think ours is a free platform. Anybody can come and sign up. And when you actually deploy, that's when you need to consider the cost of deployment and hosting and all of that, right, Murali?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Cool. So feel free to sign up. It's a free platform. Anybody can explore. We have a great documentation, videos, everything, certification program. So feel free to jump on. How does Kore.ai platform manage memory, including short-term episodic memory and long-term user profile memory, to enable autonomous and context-aware behavior in future interactions?
I think memory is a very, very evolving topic as we speak right now. And as you start thinking about memory, what you're trying to do is, you can think about that very similar to how we operate. I think one of the greatest examples I heard was in a recent discussion in YC Combinator was, there is a movie called Memento. I don't know if you guys have seen it, where the protagonist basically has a short-term memory, where every day he forgets what's happening, and the next day he's back to square one. And currently, the entire agentic capabilities without memory is like that. Every interaction is done, and then you lose it. The objective of memory is to ensure that you provide the necessary context for it to retain over a period of time. And this can happen based on what is the use case you have. So, for example, a simple keypad repair is sufficient for you to understand a user's account number next time when the user comes in. But if you want to understand the entire history of conversation that particular user has with your system, then you would want some kind of a semantic memory where it summarizes everything that happens, keeps it in vector DB, and retrieves that piece of information. Episodic is very similar, but you have to then construct chapters around it and ensure that you're not really combining everything that's not necessary, but extracting out key piece of information. And then over a period of time, you really construct an entire graph around that particular individual. So you understand who that individual is and how to interact with them and make it a much more personalized situation. I mean, personalization was the thing that people wanted for a long, long time with software and enterprise applications. I think now there is an opportunity for us to really go completely specific to a particular individual who's interacting with your systems. And this memory kind of helps that and getting away from the short-term issue that we already face with LLMs.
Nice. Just one last question, Leslie. See if you want to answer this one. It's about, predictions are that, okay, agentic AI is at the early stage and a lot of failure may be happening in the coming days, months. How do you think we could be careful, and what are the things to consider when selling an AI solutions to clients? I think this question might be coming from one of our partners there. I'm not very sure, but looks like as they are selling or interacting with end customers.
Yeah, I think two things, right? One is you have to be, and this is talking about it from your partner's perspective. You have to be fairly clear about with your client about what they're signing up for, what agents really are, and what they can do. Because I think at this early stage, one of the worst things that can happen is people have these very inflated expectations of what agents are and what they can do. And then they go in and they realize that it's a lot more work than what they initially thought. And the second thing is this time not from a partner's perspective, but from a client's perspective, is that if you think about and I think Murali spoke about it to some extent, but you need to understand the governance layers that you need to add around and wrap around agentic AI, around AI agents. Ultimately, these are, like I said, software talking to each other in English, right? So to me, governance, and I have some work that I'm currently doing on this, which is interesting. But to me, there are about four pillars to being able to safely and securely deploy AI agents. And the four are the baseline is data governance, which I think is really critical irrespective. The second is human oversight wherever appropriate. The third is verification, validation at almost every step of the agent execution flow. And that can also be agent take, obviously, or that can have some other guardrails or what have you. But you need to be sure that when an agent is talking to another agent or an agent is talking to another tool, the conversation is verifiable, auditable, and so on. And then the fourth, which is really essential, and again, Murali talked about it, is architecture. How are you architecting your agents? How do you define the scope? How do you define the atomicity of the tasks that the agent is going to be able to cover? And then how do you architect its interactions with other agents, with tools and so on, is a core part of agent design that is so critical, because if you design it wrong, if you design it too broad, if you give it too broad a role or too access to too many tools, it'll probably end up being counterproductive and not achieving the outcome. So you have to think about these things when you build, and then when you sell, obviously, set expectations right.
Excellent. I think this is still a further deep topic, I think. And there is quite a bit interest on this one. I really want to thank all the attendees who stayed back so long, had so many questions. I need to respect time of the speakers as well as the attendees. So we'll try to now summarize this. But if there are any more questions, please feel free to send it across our way. You can send it to info@Kore.ai and we'll take those questions, or you can put it on contact us and we'll definitely happy to answer those questions. So in summary, I think it was a very interesting conversation. Leslie, you setting the tone or the context right from deterministic all the way to agentic, and really talking the practical approach of it. It's not going to be full-fledged agentic anytime soon. It's going to be a transition phase, with deterministic and then semi-deterministic and semi-agentish to agentic kind of a journey. And then Murli, you coming behind with all the capabilities that need to be considered, and what the role of the designing the agents and the studio and all of that. It's very, very important. Very vast topic, but I think both of you really made it very practical and simple to understand. And of course, I'm sure that must have opened up more questions for sure. But I hope that it has also helped clear a lot of doubts, early stage doubts. And now the next conversations will be double click on those further clarified points. So really interesting conversation we had today. Thank you so much, both of you. And thank you so much to all the attendees who stayed back and asked questions. Thank you, really. Appreciate it. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks.